Hi everybody, just a quick update with some of the work that you did in week 2 and looking ahead to week 3. Week 2, let's start with the papers and the film reviews. A lot of really great improvement. Some of you were really showing a lot of improvement and being specific about the readings and putting forth good examples that supported some kind of direct response to the prompt. So for those of you that don't receive the grades that you wanted to this week, I would encourage you to pay attention to the feedback that I gave in the first week update video, and to take note now that if you're not doing the readings and you're not responding directly to the prompts, you're not going to do well on something that is really composing a large chunk, that really composes a large chunk of your grade, and it's really the only way for us to interact with the material that we're covering in this class. We're also really, we're going to return to some sports later in the week, but if baseball is your favorite sport, we have some really great readings on baseball this week, and it'd really be a shame if you didn't engage with those and learn something about the sport that you enjoy, because many of you in your survey responses said that you really wanted to have this knowledge moving forward in your careers, in your kind of everyday lives, to apply. So I'd encourage you, especially heading into the third week of 7, to realize how big of a part of the grade the written responses are, and to get excited about the content that we're moving through, because you really only get one chance at it. The film reviews were also pretty good. I'd encourage everyone who's doing a film review for week 3, which is on Pony Excess, which is a really fascinating film, not just for enthusiasts of college football, but anyone who cares about college athletics, the kinds of rules that govern the NCAA, and the way this hangs over still the amateur status of college athletes, and how that actually plays out in practice. Many of you have friends who are college athletes, might be athletes yourselves, and are fans of college athletics. So this is a really relevant week beyond the particular sport of football, and those of you, especially who watch the film, will get into that. But for those of you doing a film review this week, just make sure that you're paying attention on the assignments page at the instructions for the film review. It's not just kind of tell me that you saw the film, but there's some specific questions that you have to address. You have to kind of present some analysis and make your own argument.
Second quiz, a little bit lower of a class average, so we can look at what problems people had in this quiz. The first question about baseball being introduced in Japan, you kind of had identified 2 parts here, so that might have tripped some of you up. But it was explicit. Both ends of the answer were explicitly addressed by Gutman. The first is that it is a misconception that baseball arrives in the post-war occupation. This is something that Gutman's trying to argue that is incorrect, that we have to look earlier. So it is in the Meiji era that baseball arrives. And another thing that he wants to correct is that it wasn't for any reasons that it aligned with Japanese civic rituals of state. In fact, it was because it was not Japanese, because it was symbolized with modernity in the United States, that it spread quickly and especially took root in educational settings like we read about. So the first option here is sort of the most wrong, right? Because it's the 2 misconceptions that Gutman is working against. So again, those are kind of questions where you have to make sure you're understanding the author's arguments, and when you kind of see them step back and belabor a point, that's a good idea. That's a good moment to take a special note of. The National League, as it formed in the 19th century, so a couple things that it seemed like people got tripped up on. The first is Holbert is correct, right? This is a major figure that we learn about in the readings, but and in the first answer we have lopsided competition between large and small clubs, which also was a feature at moments of the National League, but it's not a distinguishing characteristic that Rees is talking about, the selection from Rees is talking about as the ideal of the National League, or what would come to be the stable form of the National League. Instead, that's something that the National League is trying to work against: lopsided competition. They want the most competitive teams all at the same level within one league, right? And controlled largely by players. That should have tipped many of you off to being the wrong answer, because a big point that is made in that reading as well is that while the previous large league was an association, because it was a players' association essentially, that changes in the National League to give clubs more power. So the second answer is wrong because it identifies, or it says that Seymour thinks that this was democratic, and Seymour makes an argument about how this was undemocratic, and that this undemocratic nature of baseball actually continues to persist to the present day. The last answer is the correct one: controlled by large clubs, guided by Holbert, and fairly undemocratic. So the opposition between undemocratic and democratic in the second and fourth questions, when there is such a contradiction there where it has to be one or the other, make sure you go back into the reading and try and find where they're talking about that particular issue. Question 3, pretty much everyone got right. But question 4 was pretty tricky. So according to Kahn, which factors best, and I italicized best because I wanted to ask a question about what are the determining factors for why the AAGBL and the NGBL don't exist today. So the second most popular answer, incorrect, was that the leagues were never a commercial success. Women's sports clashed with conservative cultures of the 1950s. One side of that is correct. Women's sports did clash with conservative culture of the 1950s, but the leagues were a commercial success. And in fact, we get a lot from Kahn to understanding what a big deal these leagues were, how many people attended them, how successful they were, especially in particular kinds of urban settings. And the player testimonies really should give you a sense of how commercially successful these leagues were at certain points, and how many people were coming out to cheer them on, and what it meant for these women to be able to earn a really good living off of playing a sport, which is something that comes across very strongly in the testimonials as something that kind of, it weirds them out. Like, I can't believe I'm doing what I love for money. So for that money to have been paid to them, there had to have been a period of commercial success. So that's hopefully where people who might have been on the fence about answering picked the first answer. The suburban exodus and growing popularity of television. There is a mention of suburban exodus in the reading, but television is not a factor at this point. So that should have been the factor, the portion of that question that tipped you off. So the correct answer was women's sports clashed with conservative culture of the 1950s, and the leagues had difficulty recruiting softball players. Kahn tells us at the end of that chapter that a big reason that the league had to fold was because women who were playing softball did not make the jump into baseball. So when things were becoming more of a commercial challenge, the problems with a healthy player base was, mounting to the problems with the league and the reason it closed down. Last question, most of you got right as well. A few of you got tripped up on the first and fourth options. The fourth option is incorrect because the MLBI is a creation of the MLB, something that doesn't come into being until much later than the 1920s. And the first answer is incorrect because it's really describing Gutman's reading. So if you maybe got confused about which reading I was asking you about, make sure you reread the question, and it's Klein's reading that we're talking about, and he doesn't talk about the kind of reinvention of the American sport and the symbolic ties to modernity in Japan and the Caribbean. So those are the quizzes, and I want to take the time to week go through the answers with you and point out what it is that I'm trying to get you to remember through the quizzes. Because really, these are a smaller portion of your grade. They're nothing to lose sleep over, but they are a way for you just to kind of check in on yourself and make sure that you're getting out of the readings the important points that are going to help you write effective weekly papers. So think of this really as kind of a self-assessment of your reading comprehension and your ability to track what the important parts are that you can base a weekly response around.